Welcome, everyone. We're so pleased to have all of you join us. This is our fourth gathering of our book club this year. My name is Pamela Silberman. I'm one of the co-founders of the Smell and Taste Association of North America, or STANA, as we like to call ourselves. Katie Boateng and I, along with our strategic expert advisors, Dr. Polly Joseph, Dr. Nancy Rawson, and Jennifer Trackman of the Monell Center, formed STANA in 2020. I'm an acquired anosmic. I lost my sense of smell from a sinus infection in 2008, over 13 years ago. And we launched STANA with the hope of representing this patient community and just growing awareness around the issues of taste and smell dysfunction. We created the book club with the goal of creating a safe space for people to gather, to share insights and ideas, and to talk about some really interesting writing. We're in the process of selecting our readings for 2023, which we'll share with you at the start of the year. But today we have an hour with Bob Holmes to talk about flavor, the science of our most neglected sense. We're gonna start the conversation between having Katie and Bob have a conversation, and then we'll open it up for discussion on everybody on the Zoom. And I just wanted a couple of ground rules. As I noted, we've muted everybody, but you'll be able to come off mute once we sort of open it up for discussion. And you can certainly raise your hand or use the reaction button on your Zoom to let us know if you'd like to make a comment or ask a question. Certainly, there's also a chat function that you can see if you put your cursor over the navigation bar, and you could write something in the chat if you had a comment or a question that you'd like. We'll keep an eye on the chat function too. We just want to ask that you'll be respectful of others while we're talking, in the way that you ask a question or make comments. And please keep your comments brief so other people will have time to speak as well. When you're asking a question, if you can come off camera, come onto camera so we can see you, that'd be great. And if you can introduce yourself, we'd really appreciate that by letting us know your name, where you are, and your connection to the world of taste and smell. With that, I'd like to introduce you to Katie and Bob. As I mentioned, Katie's a co-founder of STANA. She is the president of the organization. Katie's an acquired anosmic who lost her sense of smell after suffering from a post-viral infection in late 2008, early 2009. Katie created the Smell podcast in August of 2019 to share listener stories, scientific research, and news about the world of smell. She launched the podcast while also serving as an undergraduate admissions counselor, and since its launch has hosted and recorded over 100 interviews. Katie is an adjunct professor. She's also a Fifth Sense ambassador and a member of the Patient Advocacy Committee of the Global Consortium for Chemosensory Research. Bob, our guest here today, Bob Holmes has been a science writer for over 20 years. He has published more than 800 articles across a wide range of topics. He currently writes and edits as a contributor to Knowable magazine. Before that, he spent more than 2 decades at New Scientist, and he was also written for magazines including Science, Health, U.S. News and World Report, National Wildlife, and also for the San Francisco Chronicle. He has taught in the science writing program at UC Santa Cruz, and he holds a PhD in ecology and evolutionary biology. His interests are wide-ranging through sensory science, evolution, anthropology, behavior, astrobiology, and life sciences. With that, I'd like to welcome Katie and Bob.
Hi there.
Hi, thank you so much, Pamela. Great, so we're going to go ahead and get started with some questions for Bob about his book, Flavor, that we read. If you haven't read it yet, make sure you check it out. But Bob, to get started, what inspired you to write this book? What inspired you to write Flavor? And what was the research and writing process like for you?
Yeah, well, I've always been curious, been intrigued, I guess, by the sense of smell, especially, and flavor more generally, I suppose. And it turns out that there's an awful lot of science that's just not known about how smell and taste work. Scientists still can't even agree on how many tastes there are. So there's all this really cool science, and also I love to cook and eat, and obviously flavor is very closely involved there. And so it seemed like a really wonderful opportunity to put all those interests together and spend time with people that study smell and taste and food and cooking and all those good things.
You
So
cover so many different topics in this book. I'm just amazed by the number of interviews you did. Do you remember how many?
I went through and counted this afternoon, actually. I did 97 interviews, and my file has over 700 documents in it, mostly scientific papers. So there's, the organizational challenge was tremendous. So once I knew I was going to write the book, I guess the first step was to go to one of the leading chemosensory conferences that's held every year in Florida, and that gave me a chance to meet the leading people. So I spent, the conference was like 5 days, and I just spent the whole time buttonholing one person after another and getting to talk to them and building acquaintances so that I could go back to them later. Many of them are people that I went back to visit later. I did a trip to Philadelphia to visit Monell Chemical Senses Center, which is the place for smell and taste research. There's a guy at University of Pennsylvania Medical Center who works on anosmic people, and so I spent time with him. Later on, I somehow, to my great amazement, managed to talk myself into visiting one of the industrial flavor companies, Givaudan, which is the world's largest. I say it was to my great astonishment, because they don't like to publicize what they do. They supplied the added flavors that are in an awful lot of consumer products. Their Givaudan's U.S. campus is in Cincinnati, and it shares a parking lot with Snapple, which kind of makes you think that maybe there might be a connection in there somehow, although they neither confirm nor deny that. Snapple wants you to think that their stuff is all apples and so forth. It's not. It's got additional flavors added, but they're never going to say powered by Givaudan the way a computer would say powered by Intel. And yet they let me in, which was really intriguing and very fun to see what the world of industrial flavor design is like. So lots of interviews over the course of a couple of years, several trips, but most of the time was on the telephone. This was pre-Zoom days, so it was all by telephone. And lots of organization.
I bet. I can imagine.
Yeah, the logistic challenge of keeping it all straight was significant.
Lots of outlines, I imagine.
Yeah.
So can you please define taste, smell, and flavor?
Sure.
And tell us a little bit more about how they all interact with each other.
Sure. I suspect this audience is more sophisticated than most in terms of knowing that taste, in the technical sense, is sweet, sour, salty, bitter, umami. There may be a couple of other tastes in there as well, but that's taste in the strict sense, and everything else is smell. So the difference between a strawberry and a raspberry, except for differences in the amount of sugar, which is sweet, or acid, which is sour, all the other differences are down to smell. So it's very, very, the English language doesn't help us here, because of course we use the word taste for everything. When you have a cold and when normal osmic people have a cold and their nose blocks up and they can no longer smell something, we all say, oh, I can't taste anymore. I have a cold, I can't taste. And of course, that's exactly opposite from the truth, because you have a cold, you can't smell, all that's left is taste. And so So the language confusion is difficult. So taste proper is, you know, salty, which is detecting sodium and a few other ions, electrolytes basically. Sweet, which is sugar. Umami, which is proteins, amino acids. So that's nutrient as well. Sour is acid, which often is a marker for something spoiled or unripe fruit. And bitter tends to be a marker for poison, for something toxic. So, you know, we all instinctively avoid bitter stuff. Many of us learn to like it, but mostly, you know, everybody remembers their first taste of coffee, and it was pretty awful. But yeah, so taste proper is a very defined, very narrow sense, and it's basically about, you know, is this worth eating? Are there nutrients here? Are there toxins here?
Yeah.
And everything else, the smell is the what is it? And that's a much more variable, much more sophisticated sense to get, but lets you identify a lot of different things. So, you know, smell, we have like 400 different odor receptors in the brain or in the nose. And so, you know, every molecule, every odorous molecule triggers one or more of those. And every odor receptor is triggered by one or more molecules. So really, when you smell something, you get, it's like a chord played on a piano with many different, you know, each odor receptor is one note on the chord. And so each smell triggers a different chord, and that's what the brain recognizes as an odor.
Yeah, well, that actually leads me into my next question for you is, what does science know about how smell works? And what I mean by this is there are a few different theories out there on how smell functions. So could you maybe share a little bit more with us about the differences between like shape theory and vibration theory of smell?
Yeah, so there's the prevailing view, the sort of mainstream view is that each one of those 400 odor receptors is a protein molecule with a different shape. And some odorant molecule out there just fits into the pocket like a key going into a lock, or actually I like even better the analogy of like an expensive camera going into a case with form-fitting foam padding. So it's exactly shaped right and it fits in. And if you were to try and put a, you know, different model of camera in, it wouldn't go. So that's the prevailing view, is that you get this shape recognition, that the shape of the odorant molecule fits into the shape of the receptor and turns it on effectively. And so that's what happens. And there's a minority view that says that it's not that way, that it's, you know, there's some of that going on, but also there's that the receptor is recognizing the vibration of the odorant molecule somehow. They have a detailed physical explanation, which involves something called quantum tunneling that I don't understand, but that's okay. That there's some sort of a physical way in which the receptor detects the vibration of the molecule. And there's a little bit of evidence that that could be the case, that molecules that are the same shape but different in vibration, like they have a heavier isotope of hydrogen in them or something like that, are sometimes perceived differently, but not always. So this seems to have, nothing seems to have happened, nothing seems to have changed in this debate over the last 5 years or so. But the sense that I had when I was talking to people for the book was that, you know, there's a lot of people were kind of going to keep an open mind, but they saw little reason to abandon the shape theory.
That makes sense.
Yeah, so it seems like it's probably shape.
Gotcha. So my next question for you is actually, given how important smell is in flavor perception, how do you think those impacted with smell dysfunction or perceiving flavors? And do you know of any studies that dive into this in any more detail?
Yeah. I suspect that members of this group know better than I do about that, about what's available in terms of flavor perception. So I hope later on when we get to the discussion that I can have a chance to hear your thoughts on that, on what if any perception of flavor you have. But I mean, generally, I guess I would expect if you have a complete loss of smell, then all you get is taste and texture. And that there wouldn't be any other perception of flavor. I should back up actually just a bit and say that the flavor itself is it's actually even more complicated than just smell and taste, because texture is part of flavor. The difference between the luscious texture of full cream yogurt, full milk, full fat yogurt, and the kind of thinner texture of no fat yogurt. Things like the heat of a chili pepper or the cool of mint are actually part of the sense of touch, not taste or smell, and that figures in flavor too. Sight and sound matter. That there have been studies that show that strawberry mousse tastes sweeter if it's served on a white plate than if it's served on a black one. Go figure. Probably that has to do with that you can see the red color better on the white plate, and that triggers the brain to expect sweetness because red fruits are ripe and sweet, and yeah, so you get this expectation built up. Potato chips taste fresher if you hear a louder crunch. They actually tested this by having people eat hundreds of Pringles potato chips, which are all identical. It's a perfect experimental system. So they had people eat Pringles while they wore headphones, and the researchers played back the sound of their munching with high frequencies turned up or turned down. And so when you get the louder crunch, people say, oh yes, these are fresher, they taste fresher. So it's sound is part of flavor too. And again, it probably figures into expectation. So for people that are acquired anosmics, that lost their sense of smell later in life, expectation would figure in too. That you can look at something that you know what used to taste like, and there I'm using the word taste in the broad sense. You can look at something that you know what the flavor was like, and kind of expect it, and so you might get echoes in your brain. Someone that's been an anosmic from birth, I would assume, has none of those expectations, and therefore would probably not have, if they're completely anosmic, then they shouldn't have any flavor perception other than taste and texture. I see some shaking heads, which makes me think that I'm going to learn something really interesting in a little while. So, so that would be what I'd expect for someone with complete loss of smell. Someone with a partial loss of smell, if it's just reduced olfactory acuity, you're just turning down the volume, then I would guess that that's just turning down the flavor a little bit. If it's a distorted sense of smell, then you probably get what's usually called an unpleasant experience of flavor. So there's very little done on this, I think. There's a lot done on anosmia related to COVID. There's a lot done on treating anosmia. I don't think there's much done on the sensory perception of people with anosmia. And even less on taste. Because
we absolutely need more studies.
Yeah, there's pre-COVID, there were very few people that lost the sense of taste. And those tended to be people that head and neck radiation treatment for cancer.
Mhm.
And there are people who have a lot of other stuff going on in their lives, and so there's not much done on what the effect is of loss of taste, and how much that affects eating behavior. The report is that many of those cancer patients lose their appetite, but many cancer patients lose their appetite anyway. It's really hard to tease those apart. So I think COVID is unfortunately, a really great research opportunity for understanding loss of taste, because all of a sudden there's a lot of people who have sudden taste loss, and it's not related to cancer. And so there's an opportunity to learn a lot there.
So Bob, my next question for you is actually about the vocabulary of smells. And I want to know, in just your viewpoint or your opinion, why do you think we are so bad at describing how things smell? And I'm not talking about like an expert nose or a perfumer, because I think that they practice, they get really good at possibly at describing those smells. But the layperson, if I was to ask someone to explain to me what that cheeseburger smells like, they would maybe say like
a cheeseburger. Yeah,
like a cheeseburger, right?
Yeah.
And so I guess my question is, what are your thoughts on that? Why are we so bad at describing smell?
Part of it comes down to lack of vocabulary, and I don't know why we don't have a vocabulary for it, but we don't. We have we're visual animals. For things that we see, we have all these great words for colors. We can say that's yellow, and everybody knows what we mean. For smell, all we say, all we have is analogy words. That smells lemony. That smells floral. That smells skunky. Those kinds of words. It's analogies, and it's as though we had to talk about color by saying, well, that's the Swedish flag is lemony and sky blue, or sky colored, lemon colored and sky colored, and it gets messy. So for some reason we don't have those words. We've got analogy words, and we don't practice at the analogy words very much, unless you're a professional wine taster or a perfumer or a real enthusiast. We mostly don't. Little kids are always shown, what color is this? Oh, that's blue. And that's something we drill them on. And we don't drill them on smells. There are a few cultures that have more objective words for smell, for odors, and they do seem to be better than we are at describing odors, at describing them repeatedly in the same way, and things like that.
Great.
And presumably people for whom smells are more salient parts of their environment.
Yeah, I think we definitely need more practice on this. And we actually have Frauke Galia who's here. Frauke does an amazing job of describing smells. So at the end, we'll make sure we share that information,
Oh, good.
Frauke, of describing smells in different ways for people and making them more accessible, which is pretty cool for me, who has anosmia, to kind of think about how it would smell using vocabulary words.
Cool.
So,
I'm looking forward to that. Yeah.
Yeah. So one of the next questions I wanted to ask you is, in the book, you talk a little bit more, you go into detail about the idea of satiety and things no longer tasting as good after like 4 or 5 bites. Do you think that's any different for people who have smell dysfunction?
Yeah, well, what you're referring to is this thing that's technically called sensory specific satiety. The idea being that repeated exposures to the same stimulus become less, register less. And so, the first bite of mashed potatoes tastes great. The 5th bite is still good. By the time you get to the 30th straight bite of mashed potatoes, you're getting kind of tired of mashed potatoes. And, one of the reasons that we eat so much at Thanksgiving is that we have a wide range of things on the plate, and so forth. So, you know, so there is this sensory specific satiety. Presumably, if you're anosmic, you would have less reward from the food in the first place. So it's not clear that you're, you know, what happens with people who aren't anosmic is that the reward circuits of the brain respond less to each bite, to each successive bite. And so, you know, if you're not triggering the reward circuits anyway, my guess is that there isn't much sensory specific satiety unless it comes through taste. And I'm not sure about that. But the other thing to say about that, I think, is that the sensory specific satiety, I think, is a short-term effect. That if there's a lot of different stuff on my plate, I'll eat more at Thanksgiving dinner, but probably the next day I'll eat a little less to make up for it. And that's how most of us maintain more or less steady weight. And it's not clear that smell figures in that longer term regulation very much. I mean, as you probably all know, people that lose their sense of smell don't tend to lose weight. Most of them don't tend to gain weight. You know, I think the last statistics I saw were about 2/3 of anosmic people maintain their weight just as they were before. About 10% of them lose weight. And those are mostly people that have distortions of the sense of smell rather than complete loss, so that things start to smell chemically or putrid, and it's easy to imagine why they're less likely to eat. And then there's a small subset of people that do gain weight, and they tend to be, and I don't know how strong this relationship is, but I've heard it said that they tend to be people who are prone to cravings, to food cravings. And so possibly what's happening is they have this sensory hole, this food craving that they can't fill because they can't perceive the flavor of the food. And so they keep eating in hopes of filling the hole.
That makes sense. I think for my own personal story, when I first became anosmic, I overate and gained weight, a lot of weight in that first year. And then as I adjusted to my new reality, I think it just kind of stayed the same after that point. I no longer was like chasing that, maybe like you're saying, that craving. But that was just what I dealt with personally. But I can see how that would make sense, that for some it impacts them, for some it doesn't make a difference.
Yeah. So
very fascinating.
As a sort of in the most general terms, I think it shouldn't matter much to most people.
So my next question that I have for you is, in terms of flavor, what advice or guidance would you offer to those who have smell or taste dysfunction to improve their flavor perception?
Yeah, there's not a lot of that's known. And again, I suspect most of you have heard this from physicians at some point too, that there's pretty good evidence that practice matters, that you can, some people at least can recover some part of their sense of smell by sniffing stuff repeatedly. You know, at least 4 different strongly flavored spices or something like that. Cloves are often used. You know, a few, you know, one guy said, grab anything that says McCormick on it, grab anything off the spice shelf and sniff it hard for like 30 seconds at a time, twice a day for each of them. And I think it's a large minority of people do show some improvement from doing that. Probably, or a likely explanation for it is that the olfactory neurons in the brain are the olfactory receptors are brain cells, they're neurons. And neurons do regrow somewhat, and they grow more, they're more likely to regrow if they're used. So challenging them, even if you can't smell anything at first, apparently does matter, does make a difference for many people. So that's sort of the how could I restore, how might I restore some sense of smell. But the other half of it is how can I add interest to my food? How can I, extract more pleasure from my food? And there are ways to do that too. You work on, if you can't smell, you can work on texture. You can work on salty and bitter, especially, or sour. So that, lemon juice would probably be a great thing to add to foods, because the sour brightens stuff up. I spoke to one woman who lost her sense of smell and said, well, there's not really any point in drinking wine anymore, but I like a gin and tonic now because I can get the bitter. Hot sauce, because that's not a smell perception, or part of it isn't, the heat isn't. And so, hot sauce can spice things up. If you used to have a sense of smell, you can look for triggering memories, stuff that you used to eat, that you used to like when you still had a sense of smell. I would think ought to pull back some memories and give some additional perception, some additional interest there. I talked to one woman who said, the only reason I can tell what I'm eating is that I can look at it and remember what it used to taste like. And that's, that's worthwhile.
Awesome.
But I'd also be curious later on to know about coping strategies that you folks have come up with.
Absolutely. And we'll have lots of time that we can do. We can go through some of these questions. The next thing I wanted to ask you about is, when you were doing the research process for this book, do you think that the professionals that you met with while you were writing Flavor appreciate that there's a wide dispersion among people in terms of our ability to taste and smell? Like, were they aware of the smell and taste dysfunction community, and did they have any sensitivity about that?
I think my answer would be yes, but only vaguely. I think everybody's aware, everybody that I talk to, I think, is aware that that there are differences, individual differences in perception. And we know that there are different versions of smell and taste receptors, and people with one version, might perceive sweet tastes more strongly than people with a different version. So yes, clearly there's going to be some differences there, and that does affect food choice. We know that people with, we've got about 400 smell receptors, odor receptors, different ones, and each of us has about 50 broken ones. And they're often, what's broken in you will be different than what's broken in me. And depending on which smell receptors are broken, we perceive different odors. So one of the things that cilantro is a thing that people either love or hate. And it comes down to odor. And they have found an odor receptor that's associated with cilantro preference. People with one version of this OR6A2 receptor, you can ignore that, tend to like cilantro, and people with a different version tend to not like cilantro. But if everybody that liked cilantro had version A and everybody that hated it had version B, you'd say it explained 100% of the difference between people. And if it made no difference, it explains 0%. And in practice, this particular odor receptor explains 9% of the difference. Not 90, but 9% of the difference. So most of the difference between people in whether they like cilantro or not isn't related to that odor receptor. So, there's a lot that's not known about perceptual differences. And then there's a whole nother thing that no one, when I looked at this, had looked at yet, which is, there's probably, in addition to the odor receptors and the taste receptors, there's probably a whole lot of other molecules that work upstream or downstream from there that are involved in, the part of the, this complicated molecular signaling that happens. And so it's probably true that some people just have overall more sensitive noses than other people, or more sensitive tastes. And we don't know, we know very, very little about how big those differences are. Part of the problem is that people vary from day to day in how good their perceptions are. You can measure, how small a concentration of a flavorant you can taste. You can measure it today and tomorrow, and there might be 100-fold difference in me between today and tomorrow, and that's as big a difference as between me and somebody else. And so that makes the whole thing really difficult to measure. Because if people are all over the place themselves, how can you ever know differences between people? And I think nobody's done the study.
We also don't have universal screening for smell function, which is definitely something that's needed in the world, I think, but especially in North America for sure. So, Bob, my final question for you before we open it up to the audience questions is, if you were to write flavor now, would you change your approach in any way, given the global COVID-19 pandemic and how many more people are dealing with smell and taste dysfunction?
Yeah, if I was writing it now, you would be hearing from me, because, as I said before, I think COVID is, and again, unfortunately, a really glorious research opportunity to understand more about smell and taste and what happens when those senses are interfered with. So yes, I would definitely want to know, all of a sudden we have a lot of people who have a sudden loss of smell and taste. And sometimes it comes back and sometimes it doesn't. How does it affect your ability to eat normally, especially the people who lose taste? We've had a lot of experience with people losing the sense of smell, but not much with taste. It would be great to know how that affects feeding. What's it like when smell starts to return? If you've lost your sense of smell for a month and it comes back, boy, what's that like? I'd be fascinated to know what that's like.
Thank you. So I'm going to hand it over to Pamela, and she'll kind of go through some audience questions if we have any. So I'll pass it to you, Pamela.
Yeah, so first, I noticed that Frank posted in the chat. So Frank, I can read what you wrote, or if you want to come off your mute, you can unmute yourself. But his first comment was, why is it my wife, who has lost most of her sense of smell and much of her taste, except for salty, sweet, sour, umami, and spicy without flavor, can only smell her perfume?
Ooh, that's really interesting. So if she's lost most of her sense of flavor except those 5 tastes, then that's the sense of smell that she's missing, and yet she can smell her perfume. I'm only guessing here, but my guess would be, well, there's a couple possibilities. One is that a lot of odorant molecules also trigger touch receptors in the brain, in the nose, so that you're getting a sensation from that, hot or cold or tickling kinds of things. So maybe there's some of that going on. And perfumes are very volatile. They put lots of molecules in your nose. So maybe that's it. Or maybe it's this expectation and memory thing. So a test of that would be, I suppose, if she tries a completely new perfume, one that she's never had before, can she smell that?
Interesting. Thank you. To respond to some of the questions that came up, when we were talking, I thought we could ask everyone on the call if you wanted to jump in and comment on, Bob's hypothesis about, can you detect flavor depending on what your experience is in your loss of, smell or taste. Does anybody want to comment on what their personal experience has been?
Please.
This is Linda. I was gonna say Linda bowing in. I've been sitting in too many meditation groups lately. I'm a congenital anosmic, and I never thought much about it until all this COVID things and talking about taste and flavor. I think when you were talking, and the more it's come out, the more I realized how similar things do taste to me, because I don't have the flavors. Like a white cut of pork tastes like a white cut of chicken, except it's a little moisture, probably has a little more fat. And dark pork tastes like dark chicken. Vegetables are green. And I'm also thinking, like, as you talk about, how many smell receptors did you say there were in the brain?
It's like 400 different ones.
So you have 4, and I've also had a biomedical research background. So you've got 400 locks and keys, but you've got millions of subtle variations in smell. So you would implode a whole bunch of different, is it sort of like the ratio of how many different individual smell receptors get triggered?
Yeah.
Because otherwise it's like, and I feel like I don't want my sense of smell. I would get overwhelmed. but so it's giving me a lot to think about because of all these, I sit with the fifth sense group too. And it's got me thinking a lot more. And I could I'm sorry, go ahead.
If you imagine a piano with 400 keys, then you can get a almost infinite number of different chords from it.
True. Okay.
So it's kind of like that. So that each smell sounds a different chord. And
that's a nice analogy, visual thing for me to think of. Yeah.
Yeah. And so in terms of being overwhelming, I guess it's no more overwhelming than being able to hear the different chords would be for people who can smell.
Yeah, I hear it. I feel it's like it's coming in. Too many different smells are coming in all at once. And I have trouble with visual overstimulation. So now I've got smell overstimulation at the same time. It's like,
So what do you do for interest in your food? Do you play with the sorts of things?
A lot more texture. Because then I can taste the difference, or chunky salt. I like the Triscuit crackers because you got the wheat biscuit and then the chunks of salt on it. But then all the flavors within the different varieties of wheat biscuit, Triscuits, I can't do. So I like to add like nuts into a salad because it's a different texture. Again, it's a different texture. Yeah.
That makes sense.
Yeah. But there was something else, but I forgot.
Well, for me, when restaurants went to putting the swoosh of something on the plate, they created the puree and it's on the plate. Like when all restaurants started doing that, that was like the worst thing ever because I was like, what is that? What is that thing? I can't smell it.
You just took away texture. Yeah,
they took away texture. They took away what it used to be, what it used to look like. It was broccoli before, now it's just a puree, right? So I'm an acquired anosmic. I lost my sense of smell, but I do have flavor perception. I can taste more than, it's more than the five tastes. That's so I don't know why, although your book had me thinking on so many levels, like expectations and memory, and that's probably playing there. But definitely I can describe things that I eat with more than just that this is salty or this is sour. It's got more depth than that. So I don't know if Betsy or Lauren, if you wanted to jump in on that.
Betsy, I think you have to just click the unmute button. We'll get you sorted out.
All right, are we there?
There you are.
Okay. Yes, in 2015, I had a complete loss of smell and taste, and nothing has come back. My primary care doctor sent me to Boston, and they put me through all kinds of tests there. And he said that my ninth cranial nerve had been injured in some way. And so we go on from there, but I have absolutely no recollection anymore of what foods tasted like. And I wish I could. But the texture is very important to me. Especially something crunchy. Just to know that you're eating.
Yeah.
It's not pleasant. That's for
No,
sure.
I bet.
No.
Thanks for sharing, Betsy.
Okay.
There's a question for you, Bob, from the audience. So Lauren's asking, why can I smell certain things that I can't taste? For example, I can smell coffee, but Lauren, you wrote can taste it, but I think you mean can't. So for example, I can smell coffee, but can't taste it. I can taste some things momentarily and then disappears. Is there any thoughts on that? Like why she may be able to smell certain things that she's not perceiving their taste? I wonder, Lauren, how was your smell lost? Would that matter, Bob?
Could. I'm not sure how to answer that. Again, I'm going to just sort of offer an educated wild guess, which is that one possible explanation would be that we actually have two different senses of smell. One is called orthonasal, which is sniffing from the outside, through the nostrils, and the other retronasal, which is stuff in the mouth, where the flavor molecules sort of waft up through your throat to the olfactory part of your nose. And the brain processes those two differently. So it could be, and I don't know, I've never heard of this before, but it could be that you've had a bigger loss of retronasal olfaction than orthonasal, that you can still get some stuff sniffing, so you can smell the coffee, but once it's in your mouth, you're not perceiving it as vividly, maybe. But again, that's a total guess, and I'd be real interested to know.
Can you hear me? This is
Yes.
Lauren.
Yes.
I'm Danny Reed has been unbelievably nice to me, and she said the same thing that you said.
Really?
Yes.
That makes me happy. Cool.
She's a wonderful human being.
Isn't
She
she?
told me that I should hold my nose and see what I could taste. But it actually didn't make a difference. I tried it, and I ran it by my dentist, who unfortunately I see frequently, and he thought that made total sense also.
Okay.
And I had in November 2020, there were no tests back then. I had a terrible sore throat, and I think I had some kind of infection. And then I had like altered taste. And then over like 6 months, maybe 5-6 months, I had the vaccines and my taste totally disappeared. So my internist, I live in New York City, and my internist said that she headed the long haul COVID unit at NYU. And she said, some people do very well with the vaccines and some people don't. So, but like Danny Reed said, it's the chicken or the egg. I don't know if it was the vaccines or it would have happened anyway, over the course of time. I just don't know.
Wow.
But I have virtually no taste at all, but my smell always seemed better. I didn't even know until recently, when I started smelling a lot of things, how bad my smell was. So that's my saga.
And you lost taste. You couldn't tell salt, or lemons don't taste sour or anything like that.
Well, I haven't eaten a lemon, but I do the essential oil smelling. I just started a
Mhm.
few months ago. I know that there's tongue taste, so I could sense, salty, sweet, sour,
Mhm.
bitter. Like I always say, the things that I could taste best are cilantro. I guess I have that gene.
Mhm.
Arugula and basil. Like I keep a little
Uh-huh.
basil tree in my kitchen. I'm always eating it to say, oh my God, am I getting worse? Because every day is different. Some days I can't taste it all, and some days I could
Mhm.
taste a little.
Mhm.
Fortunately, I work in healthcare, and I keep telling myself I could walk, I could hear, I could see. So I'm trying to focus on the things I have, not the ones I don't. So I guess my work over the years has given
Right.
me some perspective, because it's it's a quality of life issue. It's very depressing.
Mhm.
Mhm.
Absolutely.
Like, you want to go out to coffee? That has a whole new significance to me.
Yeah.
Thank you, Lauren. Thank you for sharing.
Thank you so much.
Frauke, I wanted to kind of come to you because earlier I mentioned how you do the vocabulary of smells for everyone on your page on Instagram, Falk Aromatherapy. So I kind of wanted to ask you, because I think Bob was also interested in that. Can you first off describe your process? So what are you doing for people when you're describing the smells there? And then why did you start doing that?
So sure, I'd be happy to share. So I'm able to smell, and along with Katie, I'm also ambassador for Fifth Sense. So I've been working with the asthma community for a couple of years now, and my background is in the fragrance industry. So I
Mhm.
spent a long time around people who smelled and described smells, but they
Mhm.
always smelled, described them in very specific ways, as you do in the
Mhm.
fragrance industry. Pretty much smells are smells. They're described as smells. And when I started talking to my anosmia friends, they're like, well, that doesn't mean anything to me. I can't relate to any of this, because especially if congenital anosmics who've never smelled it before, right?
Mhm.
So I was like, well, that's not good. I want you to be able to do it. So I started working with the other four senses a lot. And I also add temperature a little bit. I
Mhm.
added that into the mix. And I just started on my Instagram page. I was doing it for a long time and been very busy. Sorry, I continued again. But basically, I use the other four senses to try to describe a specific experience, whether it's
Mhm.
being on the beach or whether it's describing a food item or anything that smells, basically. And I just describe it with the other senses. And I use words that hopefully, and Katie, I guess you can tell me if it's true, if it helps you to have a feel for what that smell might be like, because it
Mhm.
comes from the feel of something, the texture of something. It's what does it
Okay.
sound like?
Can you give an
But
example?
oh my God, I use so many words. So I don't know. Give me a smell and I'll try.
Fresh grass.
Okay.
That one you've done, I think.
Yeah. I've done them. I don't have these memorized. Okay, but I know it. Fresh grass. So you're putting me on the spot here. No, a site would be, and I have people, so I have to close my eyes because I don't want to be influenced by what it looks like. So it'd be nice to say
Mhm.
it's green. So
Mm.
yeah, okay, grass is green, but that doesn't mean anything. But it's got a very a sharp, so it's sharp. So for me, that's kind of a texture.
Okay.
It's also grass is loud to me. It's got warmth
Okay.
to it. It's got some warmth to it
Oh,
because
cool.
it's
Uh-huh.
and that's also the emotional aspect, because a lot of people like the smell
Mhm.
of fresh cut grass, and I think it does have some the smell has some warmth to it.
Mhm.
It has what else can I off the top of my head? We haven't done taste, so then I usually go for it to me it has a little bit of a bitter taste.
Mhm.
I don't know if you'd agree with that, Bob, since
Yeah,
it's the smell.
I'd
So
never
I
thought of
go
it, but yeah.
yeah. So
Uh-huh.
it's for me, it's a mindfulness exercise, because I actually
Okay.
spend time just closing my eyes and just focusing on the smell, but rounding it out with all the other four senses.
Cool.
Plus
No,
temperature.
that's really interesting. And it makes me think something that I'd never thought of, but boy, I wish I'd been able to pursue this.
Mhm.
Some people have what's called synesthesia,
Yes.
that the different sensory modalities cross one another,
Yes.
so that they see colors when they hear musical chords, or things like that. And I would be really interested to know what synesthetics do when they get COVID and lose their sense of smell? You know, do they get
What happens then,
flavors
right? Yeah,
synesthetically? Yeah.
yeah.
Because they ought to be more tapped into the same sort of thing that you're doing,
Mhm.
where they get other sensory modalities triggered.
Right, right.
And so that would, you know, is essentially what I think what you're doing is sort of going as far as you can down the synesthesia alley
Yes.
to see what you can do.
And now I don't believe I have synesthesia, but I believe every person has a little bit of synesthesia,
Yeah.
just by the fact that I'm doing this exercise, that if you spend enough time and you really focus on it, we just don't focus on it. I mean, us smellers, we don't spend time thinking about our sense of smell as much as we should. So it's for everyone, really. The exercise is for anybody who can smell and for those who can't, to engage in that aspect of themselves a little bit more. So
Yeah. Is there any way that an anosmic can use that to build flavor, to build their flavor experience, I wonder?
I don't know.
I think it could be helpful in trying to remember. For me personally, it's been so long at this point that I really have a difficult time tapping into memories of what stuff smells like and what the flavor was supposed to be like. But I do think if I was mindful of eating my food and I had those kinds of prompts of like, it's hard or soft, or it's loud or it's quiet,
Yeah.
perhaps that could help me tap into some of those old memories. Yeah. Pamela, did you have a comment you wanted to share?
Well, I was thinking about, you know what, something that we would definitely want to advocate for with STANA and with this patient community is, and Katie sort of referred to it earlier, is, you know, universal testing. And Katie was talking about universal testing of smell, but your book makes me think that universal testing for taste is very important. You know, I'm sort of in my own head, in my own world, right, of like my smell loss, but your book points out that, you know, healthy people have a big variety when it comes to taste, depending on how many taste receptors you have, you know, the broken ones, the fixed, the ones that are operating well. And so it just I think your book helps us make the case as we move forward and we move in more into advocacy, that, you know, there should be smell testing and taste testing at an early age, right? So there becomes a baseline, because we also know that smell and taste loss, your smell and taste change over time. Certainly, we know infections and illnesses and, you know, brain injuries and cancer can cause it, but we certainly also know just the aging process, medications, so forth. So, you know, I think there's some great information in your book that will just sort of help us as we move forward in terms of advocacy. Linda, did you have something you wanted to add? I think you wanted to jump in.
Yeah, just a quick thing. Excuse me, is your name pronounced Frauke?
Frauke.
It's
Frauke.
Frauke. It's hard.
Frauke.
It's a hard
Yeah,
name.
no,
Do not worry.
I'm not good at anybody's name. So you just triggered a nice thought in me when you're talking about describing what's something like cut grass. And I just realized I can tell I'm in an ocean beach as opposed to a pond beach, because I can feel the salt.
Yes. Yes.
Otherwise,
Yes.
it would make I can't smell the seaweed. I can't smell the low, I can feel the salt on my body, and that's how I know I'm at the ocean. And I never made that connection before. So thank you.
Oh, good. Good.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Well, I just want to say thank you so much for joining us tonight, Bob, and to all of our guests for coming. Thank you for writing your book, Flavor, and for coming tonight to chat with us all.
Thanks for educating me. This has been really very valuable for me.
Very cool. And for everyone who's here, we will be posting the recorded video on our YouTube channel, probably within like a week or so. And I'll send it out to whatever email address you used when you registered for the event. But thank you to everyone again. Thank you, Bob. And we look forward to maybe some future flavor stuff from you.
We'll see.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks so
I hope
much.
you have a good rest of your evening.